Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I'm Roberto, 32 years old, and I still remember exactly how the crystal champagne glass sounded against my father's wedding ring as he prepared for his toast. Every holiday, I felt like a stranger in my own family, but nothing prepared me for what came next. "Some kids make you proud," he announced, eyes sliding past me. "Others just take up space." As laughter rippled around our table, I maintained my smile, knowing something they didn't. I had already signed a lease on an apartment in Seattle. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey of finding worth in unexpected places. Growing up in Boston, Massachusetts meant cold winters spent mostly indoors. For my family, it meant prestigious dinner parties where my father, Dr. Charles Williams, chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Boston Memorial, would entertain fellow surgeons, hospital administrators, and occasionally my mother's law partners. My mother, Catherine Williams, had made partner at one of the city's oldest firms by 33, something she never tired of mentioning. Our Beacon Hill townhouse had 5 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, and absolutely nowhere I truly felt comfortable. From my earliest memories, family dynamics were crystal clear. My older brother Jake was the golden child. 4 years my senior, he breezed through school with straight A's, while captaining both the debate team and rowing crew. His walls were decorated with medals, trophies, and eventually, an acceptance letter to Harvard where he followed in our father's footsteps, heading straight to medical school after graduation. Then there was my younger sister Sophia, the baby of the family and undisputed princess of our household. 2 years younger than me, she was blessed with our mother's striking looks and a natural talent for violin that had her performing with the Boston Youth Symphony by 13. Everyone who met Sophia fell instantly in love with her effervescent personality and artistic flair. And then, wedged awkwardly in the middle, there was me. Not academically brilliant like Jake, not artistically gifted like Sophia, just average. Average grades, average at sports, never quite failing but never really excelling either. The only thing that ever really caught my interest was woodworking, a passion that ignited when I was 10 and my grandfather took me to his workshop for the first time. Grandpa Joe was my mother's father, a contractor who had worked his way up from carpenter to owning his own construction company. While my mother had distanced herself from her working-class roots, opting for tailored suits and country club memberships, Grandpa Joe still wore flannel and jeans, his hands permanently stained with traces of wood stain and varnish. "You've got a good eye, Robbie," he told me the first time I helped him sand down a cabinet door. Unlike at home, in his workshop, I wasn't competing with anyone. There was no standard of perfection, just the joy of creating something with my hands. Under his patient guidance, I made my first birdhouse, then a simple stool, then gradually more complex pieces. My parents treated these creations with polite indifference when I brought them home. "That's nice, Roberto," my mother would say without really looking, before asking Jake about his latest exam results or praising Sophia's recital performance. At family dinners, the pattern was consistent. Jake would discuss medical journals he was reading for fun. Sophia would charm everyone with stories from her art school. When it was my turn, I'd start to describe a new woodworking technique I was learning, only to have my father interrupt with, "Speaking of school, Roberto, have you thought more about taking that SAT prep course? Your preliminary scores are concerning if you're thinking about pre-med." I wasn't thinking about pre-med. I had never once expressed interest in becoming a doctor. But in the Williams family, there was a prescribed path to success, and building things with your hands wasn't on it. The summer I turned 15, I spent almost every day at Grandpa Joe's workshop. He had retired but kept his space for personal projects, and that summer we built a writing desk together. It was beautiful oak with dovetail joints and a hidden compartment. When we finished, he told me, "You know, Roberto, there's real value in creating something tangible in this world. Your father saves lives, and that's important work. But at the end of a long day, he comes home to sit at a table someone built, eats off plates someone crafted, sleeps in a bed someone made. Never let anyone tell you that working with your hands isn't worthy." 2 years later, Grandpa Joe died suddenly of a heart attack. At the funeral, I stood silent and numb as relatives offered condolences to my mother and praised Jake for his composure and Sophia for the moving violin piece she played during the service. No one seemed to notice that I had lost the only person who ever really saw me. Grandpa Joe left me his tools in his will, much to my mother's bafflement. "What will you do with all those old things?" she asked. I stored them carefully in our basement and continued to create whenever I could, though without his guidance and encouragement, each project felt hollow. High school graduation came and went. Jake was already thriving in his second year at Harvard Medical School. Sophia was being courted by Juilliard. And I, with my solid B average and unremarkable extracurriculars, enrolled at Boston University to study business administration, a compromise with my parents who had pushed relentlessly for pre-med. In college, I finally found some freedom. Away from my parents' constant scrutiny, I registered for an elective woodworking class at the art school. My business professors were uninspiring, but in the workshop, I came alive. My woodworking professor, Alan Barnes, recognized something in me that reminded me of how Grandpa Joe had seen me. "You have natural talent," he told me after I completed my midterm project, a coffee table with an inlaid maple leaf design. "Have you considered pursuing this professionally?" The thought had never seriously crossed my mind. In my family's worldview, success meant prestigious degrees, high salaries, and the respect of Boston society. Making furniture wouldn't check any of those boxes. Still, I continued taking woodworking classes secretly throughout college, telling my parents they were business electives. I graduated with a business degree that pleased them and woodworking skills that pleased me. It was a tenuous balance, one that couldn't last forever. The Monday after graduation, I started working at Williams & Partners Financial Advisors, a firm owned by my father's college roommate, Thomas Williams. No relation, just an ironic coincidence. The position had been secured without my input, a graduation gift from my father that felt more like a sentence. "You're set for life now, son," he told me, clapping me on the shoulder. "Thomas says there's real potential for advancement. Play your cards right, and you could make junior partner in 7 or 8 years. The thought of spending 7 or 8 years, let alone an entire career, in the sterile glass offices of Williams & Partners filled me with quiet dread. My days were spent analyzing spreadsheets and attending meetings where I struggled to show interest. My colleagues were pleasant enough, but seemed equally trapped in their roles, counting down to weekends and vacations that offered brief escapes. 3 months into the job, I used my first paycheck to rent a small workspace in an industrial area of South Boston. It wasn't much, just 400 square feet with basic utilities, but it was mine. I filled it with Grandpa Joe's tools, added a few new ones I could now afford, and created a sanctuary where I could escape after work and on weekends. At my apartment, I sketched designs late into the night. At the office, I went through the motions. But in my workshop, I truly lived. I started with small projects, cutting boards, picture frames, and wall shelves, gradually building my confidence and skill. The scent of freshly cut wood and the satisfaction of fitting joints perfectly provided the fulfillment my day job never could. 6 months into my double life, fate intervened in the form of Alicia Ramirez. She walked into a craft fair where I had rented a small booth to sell some of my smaller pieces. While most people passed by with cursory glances, Alicia stopped and ran her fingers along the grain of a walnut serving tray. "This is exquisite work," she said, looking up at me with genuine appreciation. "The attention to detail is remarkable." Alicia, I learned, was an interior designer who had recently started her own firm after years of working for a larger company. She specialized in creating spaces with custom, artisanal elements for clients who valued craftsmanship over mass-produced furniture. "I've been looking for a woodworker with your aesthetic," she said, handing me her business card. "Would you be interested in creating some commissioned pieces?" That conversation changed everything. Within weeks, I was crafting custom shelving for one of her clients, then a media console for another. Alicia's commissions weren't enough to quit my day job, but they validated something I had never dared to believe. My work had value, real, monetary value that people were willing to pay for. "You have a gift," Alicia told me one evening as we finished installing a set of floating shelves in her client's Brookline townhouse. "You're wasting it at that financial firm." "It's complicated," I replied, not wanting to delve into my family dynamics with someone I still considered primarily a business contact. "It's only complicated if you make it complicated," she countered. "Look, I left a secure position with benefits and a retirement plan to start my own business because I couldn't stand another day of having my creativity stifled. Was it scary? Absolutely. Do I regret it? Not for a second." Her words lingered with me long after our conversation ended. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different future, one where I built furniture for a living instead of analyzing market trends I couldn't bring myself to care about. As my collaboration with Alicia continued, my confidence grew. She introduced me to other designers, and my client base slowly expanded. I created an online portfolio, using nights and weekends to fulfill orders. The exhaustion was real, but so was the satisfaction. My family, of course, knew nothing about this. At Sunday dinners, I still played the role of the dutiful son with the respectable business career. When my mother asked how work was going, I gave vague, positive responses that satisfied her without requiring elaboration. When my father talked about Thomas Williams's growing appreciation for my analytical mind, I nodded and accepted the second-hand compliment without correction. The duplicity wore on me, but the thought of their reaction to the truth wore on me more. Jake had just been accepted to a prestigious cardiology fellowship. Sophia had landed her first chair position with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And what would I announce? That I wanted to make coffee tables for a living? The tipping point came unexpectedly. A design blog featured one of my custom dining tables in an article about emerging craftspeople in New England. The exposure led to a flurry of inquiries and several substantial commissions. For the first time, I had to turn down projects because I couldn't complete them while maintaining my day job. That same week, scrolling through an online forum for woodworkers, I saw a post from Cascade Custom Furniture in Seattle. They were looking to add an apprentice-level craftsperson to their team, someone with basic skills who wanted to learn their distinctive Pacific Northwest aesthetic while contributing to production. On impulse, I submitted my portfolio. 2 days later, I received an email requesting a video interview. A week after that, they offered me the position. Lower pay than my financial job, but the opportunity to do what I loved full-time while learning from master craftspeople. The offer letter sat in my email for 3 days while I wrestled with the decision. Seattle was over 3,000 miles from Boston, from everything and everyone I knew. The position represented a step back financially, but a leap forward in pursuing my passion. The practical, business school part of my brain called it foolish. The part that came alive in my workshop called it salvation. In the end, I accepted the position and gave notice at Williams & Partners. I found a studio apartment in Seattle's industrial district that I could just afford on my new salary. I arranged to ship my most essential tools and sell the larger equipment I couldn't take with me. I did all of this without telling my family, planning to break the news at Thanksgiving dinner, still 2 weeks away. The night before the holiday, alone in my half-packed apartment, I practiced what I would say. I imagined my father's disapproval, my mother's concern, Jake's condescension, and Sophia's confusion. But for the first time, I also imagined walking away from their judgment towards something that made me genuinely happy. Thanksgiving at the Williams household was always an elaborately orchestrated affair. My mother spent weeks planning the menu, ordering a heritage turkey from a farm in Vermont, selecting wines with her consultant, and having the house professionally decorated with autumnal arrangements. The guest list typically included extended family, family friends, and the occasional orphan colleague who couldn't make it home for the holiday. This year was no different on the surface. I arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon, the same time I always arrived, with a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford but knew would meet my father's exacting standards. The house smelled of sage, butter, and cinnamon, the familiar scent of holidays that had always brought comfort even amid the underlying tension. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, answered the door with her usual air kiss near my cheek. "Roberto, darling, you look thin. Are they working you too hard at the firm?" Before I could answer, she was already moving on to greet another arriving guest. Inside, the formal dining room had been transformed with my mother's trademark elegance. The long mahogany table, machine-made but expensive, I noted automatically, was set with the Wedgwood china reserved for special occasions. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and name cards in my mother's perfect calligraphy marked each person's place. I found myself seated between my cousin Anthony, a pharmaceutical sales representative who loved to talk about his commission structure, and Mrs., Peterson, my mother's former law professor who was now in her 80s, and increasingly hard of hearing. It was a strategic placement, I realized. Far enough from my father that any conversation between us would need to be projected across the table. Jake and his fiancée Rachel were seated near the head of the table beside my father. Sophia sat on my mother's right, with her current boyfriend Tyler, a cellist she'd met through the symphony. The seating arrangement was a physical manifestation of our family hierarchy, one I had long since stopped questioning aloud. The first hour passed in a blur of small talk and appetizers. I nursed a glass of Cabernet, then another, as my aunt inquired about Anthony's recent promotion and my uncle praised Sophia's latest performance. When Mrs. Peterson asked about my work, I gave my standard vague response about the financial sector, a description just boring enough to discourage follow-up questions. By the time the turkey was served, I had consumed 3 glasses of wine on an almost empty stomach. The alcohol dulled the edge of my anxiety but also loosened my grip on the careful facade I had maintained for so many family gatherings. When Jake announced his acceptance to the cardiology fellowship, complete with a touching story about a young patient who had inspired his specialty choice, I felt the familiar sting of inadequacy, now tinged with resentment. "That's wonderful news," my father said, raising his glass. A toast to Jake, continuing the Williams medical tradition with distinction. Everyone clinked glasses and murmured approval. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with her napkin, her pride palpable. Next came Sophia's announcement about being selected for a prestigious chamber music festival in Austria the following summer. Again, glasses were raised, congratulations offered, questions asked about the program and her preparations. In the momentary lull that followed, I took a deep breath and said, "I actually have some news too." Heads turned toward me with varying degrees of interest. One of my pieces was featured in New England Design Monthly last week. It wasn't my biggest accomplishment, but it was something I was proud of, something I thought might translate to their world of prestigious institutions and recognizable achievements. "Pieces?" my Aunt Patricia asked, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean, like a written article?" "No, a furniture piece," I clarified. "A dining table I designed and built." They did a spotlight on emerging craftspeople. A brief silence followed, broken by my father clearing his throat. "Speaking of emerging talents, did I mention that Thomas's son just made junior partner at Goldman Sachs? Only 30 years old. Quite remarkable." And just like that, my news was dismissed, the conversation redirected. It was such a familiar pattern that I shouldn't have felt the sting so sharply, but the wine had weakened my emotional armor. I reached for my glass again, draining it as my cousin launched into a story about his recent sales conference in Las Vegas. My mother, ever vigilant about the flow of conversation, prompted Jake to share details about the house he and Rachel were considering in Cambridge. As he described the historical features and proximity to the hospital, I found myself studying the table where we sat, noticing the machine-cut dovetails on the drawers, the veneer that disguised the manufactured core. It was expensive but soulless, much like the life my parents had envisioned for me. The dessert course arrived, pumpkin pie, pecan tart, and my mother's famous cranberry bread pudding. As plates were passed and coffee poured, my father stood, glass in hand, for what had become a Thanksgiving tradition, his annual toast reflecting on the family's accomplishments. "Catherine and I are blessed," he began, smiling at my mother, "to have raised children who continue to make us proud." He nodded toward Jake, "A son who will soon save lives, with the same dedication I've tried to demonstrate throughout my career." Then toward Sophia, "A daughter whose music brings beauty to the world and joy to everyone who hears her play." I waited for the acknowledgement that wouldn't come, my fingers tight around the stem of my refilled wine glass. "As parents," he continued, "we invest everything in our children, hoping they'll fulfill their potential. Some kids make you proud." He paused, his gaze sweeping past me. "Others just take up space." Laughter rippled around the table. Not cruel laughter, but the indulgent chuckles of people who didn't realize they were witnessing a public humiliation. Or perhaps they did realize, but had grown so accustomed to my role as family disappointment that it seemed unremarkable. My face burned. The room seemed suddenly too warm, too crowded, too suffocating. 4 years of college, 3 years at a job I hated, countless holidays of diminishment and dismissal, All of it crystallized in that single moment of collective laughter at my expense. But instead of shrinking, as I always had before, something hardened within me. I felt a strange calm descend, the clarity that comes with absolute certainty. I raised my own glass and smiled. "Good thing I just accepted a position with Cascade Custom Furniture in Seattle," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I start in 2 weeks. Don't worry, I'll be 3,500 miles away, so I won't be taking up space here anymore." Silence fell over the table like a heavy curtain. My father's expression froze somewhere between disbelief and anger. My mother's hand went to her throat, a habitual gesture when she was distressed. "Seattle?" Sophia finally asked. "But that's across the country." "Yes," I confirmed. "That's rather the point." "You're leaving Williams and Partners?" my father demanded, his voice hardening. "For some carpentry job?" "Furniture design," I corrected. "And yes, this is hardly the time for this discussion, Roberto," my mother interjected, her smile tight as she glanced at our guests. "Perhaps we should talk about this privately later." "I'm not sure what there is to discuss," I replied. "I've accepted the position. I've given notice at the firm. I've found an apartment in Seattle. It's done." "This is ridiculous," my father said. "You can't throw away a perfectly good career on a whim. Thomas has invested 3 years in training you." "It's not a whim," I said. "I've been building furniture for years. You just never bothered to notice." An uncomfortable murmur ran through the guests. My Aunt Patricia suddenly became very interested in rearranging her dessert fork. "Mrs." Peterson cupped her hand around her ear, trying to catch the increasingly tense exchange. "You're making a scene," my father hissed. "No," I replied, standing up and placing my napkin beside my half-eaten pie. "I'm making a choice. For once, I'm making my own choice." I turned to my mother. "Thank you for dinner, Mom. Everything was delicious, as always." And with that, I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer, and into the cold November night, closing the door on 29 years of trying to be someone I wasn't. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur. Streets I had known all my life seemed suddenly foreign, as though I were already gone. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my pocket, but I couldn't bring myself to check it until I was safely inside my apartment, door locked behind me. 5 missed calls from my mother. 3 from Jake. A series of texts from Sophia. "What was that about?" Followed by, "Are you serious about Seattle?" And finally, "Call me, please." I silenced the phone and sank onto my couch, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to a complex mix of emotions. Regret, not for my decision but for the public nature of the announcement. Relief that the secret was finally out. Fear about the enormous leap I was taking. And underneath it all, a simmering anger that had been building for years. The next morning, I woke to more missed calls and a voicemail from my mother. "Roberto, your father and I are very concerned about this impulsive decision. You've always been sensitive, but throwing away a promising career over a perceived slight is not the answer. Please call us so we can discuss this rationally." Perceived slight. The words echoed in my head as I began packing in earnest. Boxes of books, clothing, kitchenware, sorting what would come with me, what would be donated, what would be stored. The physical labor provided a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. Jake stood in the hallway, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside wordlessly, returning to the box I'd been packing. "So," he said, surveying the half-empty bookshelves and stacks of boxes, "you weren't kidding?" "Nope." "Rob, come on. You're overreacting. Dad makes stupid jokes sometimes, we all know that." I straightened up, facing my brother directly. "It wasn't a joke to me, Jake. And it wasn't just about last night. It's been my entire life feeling like I don't measure up, like nothing I do or care about matters to this family." "That's not fair," he protested. "Everyone has always supported you." "Really? Name one time Dad has shown genuine interest in something I cared about. One time he's been proud of me for being me, not for fulfilling some expectation." Jake opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence said everything. "Look," he finally said, "I know Dad can be tough. He was tough on me too. It's different, and you know it. You fit the mold. I never did." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. a gesture so reminiscent of our father it was almost comical. "So that's it? You're just leaving everything behind? Your job, your family, your friends?" "What friends, Jake? I work 60 hours a week at a job I hate and spend every other waking moment in my workshop. The only person I'm close to is Alicia, and she's the one who encouraged me to take this chance." "Who's Alicia?" he asked, genuinely confused. The fact that he didn't know the name of the only person who had supported my passion was further confirmation that I was making the right decision. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm going to Seattle, and I'm going to build furniture, and for once in my life, I'm going to do something that makes me happy, without worrying about whether it makes anyone else proud." Jake stayed for another 20 minutes, cycling through arguments ranging from the practical, health insurance, retirement planning, to the emotional, Mom was crying. Sophia was upset. When he realized I wasn't going to budge, he left with a resigned, "At least call Mom." I didn't call her, not that day. Instead, I texted Alicia, who came over that evening with pizza, beer, and an unwavering belief in my decision. "I'm proud of you," she said, helping me wrap glassware in newspaper. "It takes guts to make a change like this." "Or stupidity," I replied. "Sometimes they're the same thing." She grinned. "So, do you need help packing up your workshop? That's the real challenge, right?" The workshop. My sanctuary for 3 years. The thought of dismantling it created a lump in my throat. Yeah, that's going to be tough. I can only take the essential hand tools. The big equipment has to go. Over the next week, I sold my table saw, router table, and bandsaw to other local woodworkers. Each sale felt like giving away a piece of myself, but I reminded myself that new tools awaited in Seattle. Alicia helped me carefully pack my hand planes, chisels, and other smaller tools, many of them Grandpa Joe's, for the cross-country journey. 10 days after Thanksgiving, my apartment was empty except for a suitcase of clothes and a sleeping bag on the floor. My father had not contacted me once. My mother had left several more voicemails, each progressively less demanding and more resigned. Sophia had sent daily texts, ranging from angry to understanding to sad. The night before my departure, she showed up at my door. "So you're really doing this," she said, looking around the bare apartment. "I'm really doing this." "I still think you're crazy," she said, but without heat. "But I also kind of admire it. I've never done anything this independent." Coming from Sophia, who had always seemed so confident and self-directed, this was surprising. We talked for hours that night, sitting on the floor of my empty apartment, sharing truths we had never spoken aloud. How she sometimes felt trapped by our parents' expectations too, channeled into classical music when she secretly loved jazz. How she envied my freedom to walk away. "I'll miss you," she said as she left, hugging me tightly. "Promise you'll answer when I call, even if you're 3,000 miles away?" 3,500, I corrected with a small smile. "And yes, I promise." The next morning, I loaded the last of my possessions into my SUV and the small trailer I'd rented. The December air was bitter cold, my breath forming clouds as I closed the trailer hitch and checked the ties one final time. Everything I was taking with me fit into that small space: clothes, some books, kitchenware, and most importantly, the tools that represented my future. The drive to Seattle would take 6 days, crossing through upstate New York, skirting the Great Lakes, traversing the plains of the Midwest, and finally crossing the Rockies into the Pacific Northwest. I had mapped it carefully, booking budget motels along the route. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the apartment building that had been my home. 3 years in that space, trying to be someone I wasn't. I felt a momentary pang of doubt. Was I making a monumental mistake? Then I remembered the laughter around the Thanksgiving table, the dismissal that had defined so much of my life, and I turned my eyes toward the interstate on-ramp ahead. The journey west was solitary but strangely freeing. Each mile put physical distance between myself and the weight of familial expectations. I crossed state lines like thresholds into a new life, watching the landscape change from the familiar New England hills to vast Midwestern plains to the majestic mountains of the West. On the 6th day, I crested the final mountain pass and saw Seattle spread below, a jumble of buildings nestled between bodies of water, with the iconic Space Needle punctuating the skyline. Rain fell steadily as I navigated the unfamiliar streets to my new address, a converted industrial building in the Soto district that had been divided into live work lofts. My unit was on the third floor. 800 square feet of open space with concrete floors, exposed ductwork, and massive windows overlooking train tracks and glimpses of Elliott Bay beyond. It was utterly unlike the traditional architecture of Boston, raw and unfinished, in a way that matched how I felt inside. That first night, I slept on a camping mattress in an empty loft, 3,500 miles from everything familiar, rain drumming steadily on the windows. I felt simultaneously terrified and more alive than I had in years, suspended in the liminal space between the life I had left and the one I had yet to build. My first day at Cascade Custom Furniture arrived with a torrential December downpour that seemed to be Seattle's way of baptizing me into my new life. The workshop was located in a former cannery building in the Ballard neighborhood, its brick exterior weathered by decades of Pacific Northwest rain and salt air. Inside, the space opened up into a woodworker's paradise. 20-foot ceilings, massive windows allowing for natural light even on cloudy days, and row upon row of workbenches where craftspeople were already busy with their morning tasks. The air was thick with the scent of freshly sawn cedar and pine, so different from the eastern hardwoods I was accustomed to working with. James Nakamura, the founder and master craftsman, greeted me with a firm handshake and a praising glance. In his late 50s, James had the lean, sinewy build of someone who had spent decades working with his hands, and the quiet confidence of a master who no longer needed to prove himself to anyone. "Roberto Williams," he said, pronouncing my name with careful precision. "Your portfolio was impressive. Now let's see what you can do in person." My first assignment was humbling, preparing stock for senior craftspeople, milling rough lumber into dimensional pieces ready for their projects. It was work I had moved beyond in my own practice years ago, but I understood the necessity of proving myself in this new environment. Every workshop had its hierarchy, its methods, its specific approach to the craft. I needed to learn Cascade's ways from the ground up. My colleagues were a diverse group. Peter Chen, a 30-something former software engineer who had burned out on tech and turned to his woodworking hobby full-time. Luisa Alvarez, a fourth-generation furniture maker whose family had emigrated from Nicaragua when she was a child. Marcus Johnson, a retired high school shop teacher who had joined Cascade to keep his skills sharp in his 60s. And Denise Kim, James's niece and apprentice, who at 24 had already developed a remarkable eye for design. They welcomed me with the reserved friendliness characteristic of the Pacific Northwest. Polite, helpful, but maintaining a certain distance that I later learned was called the Seattle freeze. It wasn't rudeness, just a cultural tendency toward privacy and personal space that was actually somewhat comforting as I adjusted to my new surroundings. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and information overload. My hands developed new calluses from working with unfamiliar woods. My brain struggled to absorb the different techniques that characterized Cascade's distinctive aesthetic, the subtle Japanese influences in James's joinery methods, the clean Scandinavian lines merged with indigenous Pacific Northwest motifs. Each night, I returned to my sparse loft, too tired to properly unpack, falling asleep almost instantly, only to wake before dawn, anxious not to be late. I called no one from Boston, and other than Sophia's occasional text checking in, my phone remained silent. The distance I had created was both physical and emotional, a necessary separation as I found my footing. By the third week, I had graduated from basic stock preparation to assisting Peter with a commission for a local tech executive, a massive dining table in figured maple that would seat 12. As we worked, Peter shared his own story of career reinvention. "Everyone thought I was crazy to walk away from Amazon," he told me as we carefully joined sections of the tabletop. "Six-figure salary, stock options, the whole package. My parents nearly disowned me." "What made you do it?" I asked, recognizing echoes of my own experience. I realized I was spending 50 weeks a year earning money to enjoy 2 weeks of vacation, and even on those 2 weeks, I was answering emails. He ran his hand over the smooth maple surface we'd just finished sanding. "Now I make less than half what I used to, but I go home every day having created something real, something that will outlast me. Can't put a price on that." His words resonated deeply. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who understood the compulsion to create, who valued craftsmanship over status, who had made similar choices to the one I was struggling to feel confident about. Christmas approached, bringing with it a wave of homesickness I hadn't anticipated. Not for my parents' formal dinner or the obligatory exchange of practical gifts, but for the familiarity of Boston itself. The historic buildings decorated with wreaths, the common lit up with thousands of lights, the comfort of knowing exactly where I was at all times. Seattle at Christmas was beautiful in its own way. Houseboats along Lake Union festooned with colorful lights, the Space Needle gleaming against dark winter skies, Pike Place Market bustling with holiday shoppers. But it wasn't home. Not yet. When James announced that the workshop would close from December 23rd through January 2nd, I faced the prospect of 10 days alone in my still unfurnished apartment. The thought was unexpectedly daunting. "Any plans for the break?" Louisa asked as we cleaned up our workstations on the last day before the holiday. "Not really," I admitted. "Still getting settled." She studied me for a moment, then said, "My family does a big thing on Christmas Eve. Too big, honestly. One more person wouldn't even be noticed. You should come." That Christmas Eve at the Alvarez home became my first real experience of Seattle beyond work. Their modest Beacon Hill house was bursting with relatives spanning 4 generations, from Louisa's 90-year-old grandmother to infant cousins. The food was unfamiliar but delicious, the music lively, the conversation flowing in a mix of English and Spanish that somehow didn't leave me feeling excluded. No one asked about my family back east, or why I wasn't with them. No one needed to know my background or credentials to welcome me. I was simply Louisa's friend from work, and that was enough. "You have sad eyes," Louisa's grandmother told me in heavily accented English as she pressed a plate of something sweet into my hands. "But this is not permanent. Sad eyes can become happy eyes in the right place." After the holiday break, I returned to Cascade with renewed purpose. January brought steady rain, but also increasing responsibility as James began to trust my skills more. I was assigned my first solo project, a set of nightstands for a regular client, and thrown into the deep end of client relations, design decisions, and production schedules. The nightstands were a success, delivered on time, and met with the client's approval. From there, my role expanded. By March, I was regularly taking on mid-sized commissions, developing my own client relationships while continuing to absorb the Cascade aesthetic that blended East and West Coast sensibilities. As spring emerged, so did my social life beyond work. Peter invited me hiking in the Cascade Mountains, where I discovered muscles I didn't know I had, and views that made the exertion worthwhile. Denise introduced me to the Seattle Woodworkers Guild, where monthly meetings provided both technical education and a sense of community among people who spoke the language of wood grain and joinery techniques. I found a favorite coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment, where the baristas learned my name and order within a week. I discovered the Burke Museum's collection of indigenous Pacific Northwest art, which inspired new motifs in my work. I joined a local gym to counteract the physical toll of standing at a workbench all day. Gradually, imperceptibly, Seattle began to feel less like an escape and more like a home. My loft acquired furniture, some purchased secondhand, some built by my own hands in the small corner I had set up as a home workshop. I hung photos on the walls, invested in proper kitchenware, bought plants that thrived in the diffuse northwest light. 6 months after my arrival, an opportunity arose that would cement my place in Seattle's woodworking community. A popular cafe in Capitol Hill was expanding and needed tables for their new space, 8 in total, each seating 4 people. The owner wanted something distinctive, pieces that would contribute to the cafe's artistic atmosphere. James assigned the project to me, with a nod that conveyed both approval and challenge. "Make us proud," he said simply. I poured everything I had learned into those tables, developing a design that incorporated elements of my East Coast training with the Cascade aesthetic I'd been absorbing. The table bases featured traditional joinery techniques I'd learned from Grandpa Joe, while the tops included subtle inlays inspired by Native American patterns I'd studied at the Burke. The result was something uniquely mine, not purely Boston, not purely Seattle, but a bridge between the two, a physical manifestation of my journey. When the tables were installed, the cafe owner was so pleased she hosted a small reception, inviting local design bloggers and photographers. My work was featured on several Instagram accounts with substantial followings, and inquiries began coming in from other business owners wanting similar pieces. James noticed the attention. "You found your voice," he told me after the cafe project. That's not something I can teach. Some woodworkers spend decades doing technically perfect work without ever developing a distinctive style. You're ahead of the curve. His approval meant more than any validation I had ever received. It wasn't based on meeting someone else's expectations or fitting into a predetermined mold. It was recognition of my authentic expression through craft. As my one-year anniversary in Seattle approached, I realized I had stopped checking my phone for messages from Boston. The daily pangs of doubt had subsided. My apartment felt like home, my colleagues like family, my work like a true extension of myself rather than an escape from something else. I had created not just furniture but a life, one built with the same care and intention I brought to my craft. And when I finally checked my Instagram account and saw a notification that Jake had started following my professional page, I felt a flutter of connection to the family I had left behind, not a longing to return, but a hope that perhaps someday they might understand the person I had become 3,500 miles away. Exactly 13 months after I arrived in Seattle, I opened my email to find a message from the editor of Northwest Home and Design magazine. The subject line read simply, "Feature Article Opportunity." The editor had seen my tables at Analog Coffee and wanted to include my work in an upcoming issue focusing on emerging craftspeople in the Pacific Northwest. The article would include professional photos of my pieces, an interview about my process, and details about my background and training. My finger hovered over the reply button as I considered how to respond. Would I mention my Boston background? The family of doctors and lawyers I had left behind? The Thanksgiving dinner that had catalyzed my cross-country journey? In the end, I decided on honesty without bitterness. My story was part of what made my work unique, and I wouldn't edit it for public consumption. The article, when it appeared 2 months later, was more prominent than I had anticipated. A 4-page spread with large color photographs of the cafe tables, a custom credenza I had recently completed, and a portrait of me in the Cascade workshop, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by the tools of my trade. The headline read, "From Boardroom to Woodshop, Roberto Williams Crafts a New Legacy." The writer had skillfully woven my personal journey into the broader narrative about my design philosophy, emphasizing how my East Coast training merged with Pacific Northwest influences to create something distinctive. The day the magazine hit newsstands, orders began flooding in. Individuals wanting custom dining tables, interior designers requesting meetings, a local restaurant group inquiring about outfitting their newest location. My phone rang constantly with Seattle area codes, a stark contrast to the silence from my 617 Boston contacts. James called me into his office that afternoon, the magazine open on his desk. "Looks like we're going to need to adjust your role here," he said, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I feared he was upset about the attention, perhaps viewing it as a junior craftsman overstepping boundaries. Instead, he pushed a set of keys across the desk. "The space next door has been vacant for 6 months," he continued. "I've been considering expanding, but I think you might put it to better use. You've outgrown apprentice status. If you want it, you could set up your own showroom there, still collaborate with us on larger projects, but take on more of your own commissions directly." The offer left me momentarily speechless. It was more than a vote of confidence. It was an acknowledgement of a transition from student to peer, from employee to partner. Within weeks, I signed a lease on the adjacent space. 1,200 square feet with street frontage that could serve as both workshop and showroom. I invested most of my savings in equipment, materials, and a simple but elegant sign, "Williams Craft and Design." Opening my own space was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The overhead costs meant I needed consistent commissions to stay afloat. The independence meant I could fully develop my distinctive style without filtering it through Cascade's established aesthetic. 2 other Cascade craftspeople joined me in the venture: Denise Kim, who had developed a specialty in decorative inlay work, and Marcus Johnson, who was ready to scale back his hours but not ready to retire completely. Together, we created a collective that maintained close ties with Cascade while establishing its own identity. Our opening reception attracted a surprising crowd. Local designers, former clients, fellow craftspeople, and even a few curious tourists who had read about us in the magazine. We showcased our individual and collaborative pieces, served Washington wines and local cheeses, and collected business cards from potential clients. As the event wound down, Peter approached me with his phone in hand, an unusual seriousness in his expression. "You might want to see this," he said, showing me the screen. It was an Instagram post from Jake, a photo of the magazine article open on what I recognized as my parents' kitchen counter. The caption read, "Proud of my brother Roberto making waves in the furniture world. Talent, family craftsmanship." The unexpected public acknowledgement from my brother sent a jolt through me. We had exchanged occasional text messages over the past year, but nothing that indicated he had been following my career with any real interest. The post had over 100 likes, including ones from both Sophia and my mother. That night, after everyone had left and I was alone in my new space, surrounded by the work of my hands, I finally called Jake. "So," he said when he answered, "you're kind of a big deal now, huh?" "Hardly," I replied, but I couldn't help smiling at his teasing tone, so familiar yet now free from the undercurrent of judgment that had characterized our interactions in Boston. "But things are good. Really good." "I can see that." A pause. "Rob, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not understanding. For not standing up for you that night at Thanksgiving. For a lot of things, probably." The admission was so unexpected I didn't immediately know how to respond. "I saw the article," he continued, when I remained silent. "Read it twice, actually. You talked about finding your voice through your work. It made me realize I don't know if I've ever found mine, or if I've just been following Dad's script so long I don't know the difference anymore." The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had. Jake confessed his own doubts about medicine, his growing feeling that he had chosen his path to please our father rather than from genuine passion. I shared more details about my journey in Seattle, the challenges and rewards of starting over. Mom saw the article too. He told me near the end of our call. She wouldn't admit it, but I think she's proud. In her own way. "And Dad?" I couldn't help asking, though I told myself his opinion no longer mattered. Jake's hesitation told me everything. He's, you know, Dad, stubborn. But he didn't say anything negative, which for him is practically a standing ovation. After we hung up, I sat in the darkened showroom, surrounded by pieces I had created, reflecting on how far I had come from that humiliated young man who had fled a Thanksgiving table. The magazine article had done more than bring in business. It had created a bridge back to my family, not for me to cross permanently, but perhaps for occasional visits from both directions. The following week, an email arrived from my mother, formal in tone but unmistakably warm in content. She congratulated me on the article, asked specific questions about certain pieces featured in the photographs, and ended with an invitation to call when you have time. I did, and our conversation, while still careful, felt more authentic than any we had shared before my departure. As spring turned to summer, Williams' craft and design flourished beyond my most optimistic projections. We hired 2 assistants to help with production. We expanded our showroom hours. We developed a waiting list for custom commissions that stretched to 4 months. In July, the Seattle Times included us in a feature about the city's artisanal renaissance. The photographer captured all 3 of us, myself, Denise, and Marcus, standing beside our latest collaborative piece, a dining set that combined my structural design, Denise's inlay work, and Marcus's traditional joinery techniques. The article was picked up by several online design publications, then shared widely on social media. A video tour of our workshop went viral on Instagram, bringing attention from well beyond the Pacific Northwest. One evening in August, my phone rang with a 617 area code that wasn't in my contacts. I answered cautiously, surprised to hear Alicia's voice. "Roberta Williams, furniture design star," she said, laughter in her voice. "I knew you had it in you." "Hardly a star," I replied, echoing my response to Jake, "but it's going well, really well." "I can see that. Your Seattle Times feature is making rounds in Boston design circles. I've been telling everyone I knew you when." We caught up on her business, the Boston design scene, mutual acquaintances. Then she mentioned something that caught me off guard. "Your sister called me, you know. Wanted to commission a piece from you as a surprise for her wedding. I gave her your business email." Sure enough, checking my business account later, revealed an email from Sophia, requesting a custom dining table as a wedding gift from her fiancé. The message was professional in tone, as though she were any other client, but the final line betrayed our connection. "P.S. This also gives you no excuse to miss my wedding. September 15th. Save the date. I hadn't planned to return to Boston so soon, or perhaps ever. But Sophia's indirect invitation stirred something in me. I had left in anger and hurt, fleeing rather than moving toward something. Now, with 2 years of success behind me, I could return on my own terms, secure in who I was and what I had built. That night, alone in my loft that now felt thoroughly like home, I began sketching designs for a special table, one that would serve not just as a wedding gift but as a statement about the family Sophia might create, different from the one we had grown up in. A table where everyone would have a place, where no one would be told they merely took up space. The September morning I flew back to Boston. Seattle presented me with a rare gift, clear skies and sunshine illuminating Mount Rainier in the distance, as my rideshare approached SeaTac Airport. I took it as a good omen, a reminder of the home I had built for myself that would be waiting when I returned. 2 years had changed me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. My posture was more confident, my hands more visibly those of a craftsman, my conversation no longer hedged with apologies for who I was. I had packed photos of my workshop, my showroom, and my most significant pieces, not as armor against potential criticism, but as honest sharing of the life I had created. The table I had designed for Sophia had been shipped ahead, scheduled to arrive at her apartment the day before the wedding. It was my finest work to date, a round dining table in walnut with subtle inlays of maple and cherry forming a pattern that spiraled outward from the center, symbolizing growth and connection. The base featured 8 legs joined in pairs, creating a sense of partnership and support, with each pair subtly different but harmonious as a whole. Landing at Logan Airport felt surreal. The familiar mingled with the foreign as I navigated terminals. I had walked countless times before, but now as a visitor rather than a resident. I had booked a hotel downtown rather than staying with family, a decision that preserved both my independence and everyone's comfort level with my return. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for that evening at an upscale restaurant near the public garden. As I dressed in my hotel room, a blue suit I had purchased in Seattle, more relaxed in cut than anything I would have worn in my Boston days, I practiced greetings in my head, preparing for every possible reaction from cool politeness to uncomfortable attempts at reconciliation. My phone chimed with a text from Sophia, "Just check tracking. The table arrives tomorrow morning. Tyler doesn't suspect anything. Thank you, big brother. See you soon." The restaurant was elegant without being stuffy, its private dining room softly lit and arranged to encourage mingling before the seated dinner. I arrived precisely on time, neither eager to be first nor making a statement by being fashionably late. Sophia spotted me immediately, breaking away from a conversation to rush across the room and envelop me in a hug that felt both familiar and new. We had grown up together, but were meeting as adults for perhaps the first time. "You look different," she said, stepping back to study me. "Good different. Seattle agrees with you." "Marriage seems to agree with you," I replied, noting her relaxed happiness. "At least pre-marriage does." She laughed and pulled me toward a tall man with kind eyes and a slightly nervous smile. "This is Tyler. Tyler, my brother, Roberto." "The furniture maker," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Sophia's shown me your website. Incredible work." His genuine admiration, free from the undercurrent of judgment I had grown to expect from my family, immediately put me at ease. As Sophia was called away by the wedding planner, Tyler and I fell into easy conversation about his music career, my furniture designs, and their plans for an apartment that would accommodate both a cello practice space and a dining area where they could entertain fellow musicians. "Sophia talks about you a lot," he said after a while. "She really admires what you did, finding your own path even when it wasn't the expected one." Before I could respond, I felt a presence at my shoulder and turned to find my mother standing there, elegant as always in a navy dress and pearls, her expression a careful, neutral. "Roberto," she said, leaning in for the air kiss that was her standard greeting. "You look well." "Thanks, Mom." "So do you." An awkward pause followed, broken when she said, "I've seen your work online. The magazine articles. It's impressive." Coming from Catherine Williams, impressive was high praise indeed. I accepted it with a nod, not pushing for more but appreciating the effort it represented. "Your father is at the bar," she added, her eyes flicking briefly in that direction. "He knows you're here." I followed her gaze to where my father stood in conversation with Jake and Rachel, his posture as rigid as I remembered, the set of his shoulders broadcasting authority to everyone in the room. He didn't look my way, though I was certain he was aware of my arrival. "I'll say hello shortly," I replied, not wanting to interrupt his conversation, but also not wanting to appear avoidant. The evening proceeded with the expected toasts, good-natured ribbing of the groom, and nostalgic stories about the bride. I was seated at a table with cousins and family friends, far enough from my parents to avoid extended interaction, but close enough to be included in the family circle. It was Jake who eventually facilitated a meeting with our father, bringing him over during the dessert course with a hand on his elbow that looked casual but likely provided necessary guidance. "Rob," Jake said with forced cheer, "Dad was just asking about your workshop setup in Seattle." Our father nodded stiffly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sounds like you've established yourself out there." "Yes," I replied simply. "It's going well." An excruciating silence followed, broken when my father cleared his throat and added, "Your mother follows your business account on that photo site. Instagram, shows me your pieces sometimes." It wasn't an apology or even a direct compliment, but from Charles Williams, it was a substantial concession. I accepted it as such, offering a neutral, "I'm glad she finds them interesting" in return. Our exchange lasted perhaps 3 minutes total, covering no personal ground, focusing entirely on the technical aspects of my work, types of wood, finishing techniques, tools. Yet beneath the surface conversation ran currents of recognition, if not quite understanding. As he turned to rejoin my mother, he paused, looking back at me directly for the first time. "Craftsmanship is a worthy pursuit," he said. "Your grandfather would have been proud." The acknowledgement of Grandpa Joe, the first time my father had mentioned him in connection with my work, struck me with unexpected force. I managed a nod before he walked away, leaving me with a complex tangle of emotions I couldn't immediately sort through. The wedding the following day was beautiful in the understated, elegant way that characterized Sophia's aesthetic. As I watched my sister pledge her life to a man who clearly valued her for exactly who she was, I reflected on the different paths the 3 Williams children had taken. Jake following directly in our father's footsteps, Sophia forging a related but distinct path in the arts our mother had always valued, and me breaking away entirely to build something new. At the reception, several relatives and family friends approached to ask about my work, having seen the articles or heard through family gossip about my success in Seattle. Their interest seemed genuine rather than obligatory, a marked change from family gatherings of the past. My mother, slightly softened by champagne and the emotion of the day, told me, "I've kept every article, you know, in my desk drawer at work. My colleagues ask about you sometimes." "What do you tell them?" I asked, curious despite myself. "That my son is an artisan who creates beautiful things that will outlast all of us." She smiled slightly. "That's not how I would have described success when you were growing up, but I'm learning to see things differently." The following morning, I accompanied Sophia and Tyler to their apartment, where the table had been delivered, and set up in their dining area. Watching their reaction as they saw it for the first time, Sophia's hands covering her mouth, Tyler running his fingers reverently over the inlay pattern, provided a satisfaction deeper than any client's approval had ever given me. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Sophia said, tracing the spiral pattern that flowed from the center. "It feels alive, somehow." "That's the intention," I replied. "A table is more than furniture. It's where life happens. Conversations, arguments, celebrations, everyday meals. It should feel like it's part of those moments, not just supporting them." "Philosophy and craftsmanship," Tyler observed. "No wonder you've been successful." After helping them position the table perfectly in their space, I had one final stop to make before my return flight to Seattle. I had arranged to meet my father alone for coffee, a scenario so unprecedented that when I suggested it, he had agreed immediately, perhaps from shock as much as willingness. We met at a small cafe near Massachusetts General Hospital, where he had been doing rounds that morning. He arrived in his white coat, a physical reminder of the identity that had always defined him and shaped his expectations for his children. After ordering black coffee for him, cappuccino for me, we sat across from each other, the small table between us both barrier and connection point. "Sophia's table is exceptional work," he said after a moment, surprising me with the knowledge that he had seen it. "Thank you. I went over this morning before their brunch. Sophia asked me to help check that it was level on their old floors. He rotated his coffee cup precisely on its saucer. The joinery is remarkable. I noticed the grain matching at the seams. Very precise work. Coming from a surgeon known for his technical perfection, this was high praise indeed. I accepted it with a nod, then decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "You know that Thanksgiving toast was the best thing that ever happened to me," I said, watching his expression shift from neutral to guarded. "If you hadn't made it clear how little you valued what I was doing, I might never have found the courage to leave." He flinched slightly, fingers tightening around his cup. "That was not my finest moment," he conceded after a pause. "No, but it was an honest one. And sometimes honesty, even painful honesty, is what we need to move forward." He studied me with new attention, as though seeing me clearly for the first time. "You've changed." "I found my place," I corrected. "Just not the one you had chosen for me." "And you're happy doing this work?" The genuine question, free from judgment or insinuation, marked a shift I hadn't expected. "Yes," I answered simply, "happier than I've ever been." We talked for nearly an hour, not resolving decades of misunderstanding, not becoming suddenly close, but establishing a new foundation based on mutual respect if not complete comprehension. He would never fully understand my choices, just as I would never fully understand his devotion to medicine. But perhaps we no longer needed to understand each other, to acknowledge each other's value. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated, then said, "Your mother and I are considering a trip to the West Coast next spring. Her sister lives in Portland now. If we were in Seattle, perhaps you could show us your workshop." The invitation represented a crossing of boundaries I had never imagined possible. "I'd like that," I replied. "There's a good coffee shop near my showroom." That evening, as my plane lifted off from Logan Airport, I watched Boston recede below me. The harbor, the familiar skyline, the tangled streets of the city where I had grown up feeling perpetually inadequate. I was leaving again, but this time not in flight from something, but in return to something I had built for myself. 3,500 miles separated Boston from Seattle, but the distance no longer represented escape. It was simply the space in which I had found room to grow into the person I was meant to be, not taking up space, but creating it, shaping it, making it my own. Back in my Seattle workshop the following week, I began a new project, not a commission, but a personal piece. A small side table with 8-sided geometry, each facet representing a different period of my life, all joined together to create something whole and balanced. A piece that acknowledged the past while standing firmly in the present, crafted by hands that had finally found their purpose. So what about you? Have you ever had to leave something behind to find out who you really are? Or had a moment when someone's dismissal became your motivation? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding your worth and building a life on your own terms. Remember, sometimes the most painful moments can become the foundation for your greatest strengths. Thank you for listening, and may you always find or create the table where you truly belong.